Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the zoo. The minion with me this evening is Prospero.
Hello.
And as it is once again a Friday evening, I am the keeper for this evening, Sanguine. How are you doing tonight, Prospero?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Tickety-boo. Just had a fairly good dinner of grilled pulled pork tacos
No.
and doing some work for one of my meals later in the week because I'm going to be doing... Well, what I'm doing right now is I'm mixing up what will at some point become Japanese style croquettes, but seasoned up in a more Mexican or Tex-Mex style.
Oh yeah, so a little fusion.
Yep, a little fusion dish of French by way of Japan, and then with that Tex-Mex flavor.
Sounds good.
So I have some mince that I'm going to be frying up in a little bit, but currently I just have the potatoes that, rather than boiling them and then drying them by just throwing them back into the pan for a little bit, I instead decided to really dry them out by sticking them in the oven to roast for about the past 5 hours.
Oh, what type of potato?
Just some Yukon Gold.
Oh yeah, you have to because they're waxy. If you want to dry them out.
So dry them out that way, get the skin nice and crispy. Because rather than peeling this, I'm just going to be doing it with the skin as well. Which,
if you were peeling them, it'd be like not Yukon Golds, but with the skin on, you get a little bit of a break.
Yep. So the Yukon Golds roasted up over like 5 hours in a 350-degree oven, getting mashed up.
Yeah, they'll be crispy.
Yep. With some heavy cream and butter. They're at that point where the skin or the flesh just underneath the skin is turning that golden brown of the starches turning to sugars and then turning to caramelized sugars.
But that ought to be tasty.
So those flavors, like I said, with the meat that I'm going to do, it's going to be onion and meat with a cilantro lime based sauce thrown in. Then cook off the sauce so that really cooks into the meat and onion. Mix that in with the mash. Then form them up and set them aside for when I actually decide to have this meal. Then it'll be toss them in some flour, toss them in some egg, toss them in some
panko. Yeah.
Deep fry those sons of bitches, and they become delicious. I'm also going to mix in some cheese, of course, because...
yeah, please. Once you've gone to that level, you might as well.
Yep. The mix of cheese in that will just be fucking amazing.
Yeah, it will be. It'll be like a cheesy no veg cottage pie Japanese panade croquette.
Yep, with, like I said, just that the seasoning is going to be fairly Tex-Mex.
It's not much Japan except for the panko.
Except for the style and the way that it's done.
Yeah.
All the technique is Japanese. All the flavors are not.
Yeah, they're English and French.
Yep. And
Tex-Mex.
Like I said, the Tex-Mex, because it's that cilantro, lime, and chili.
Yeah. You're not calling it coriander, so there's a win. That's what drives me absolutely wild when I'm watching Sorted Food. When I see them mockingly say, or cilantro, when they're talking about, and it's like, look, asshole, they're not the same thing.
Well, there's the
leaf of the coriander, which is a more Southeast Asian coriander.
Yes.
And then there's and then there's cilantro, which is coriander, but not the same coriander usually. They're usually two different plants, but
it tends to be a different varietal of the same plant.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like saying
it's like Thai basil, and European basil.
Or the one that I was going to go for is it's kind of like saying button mushrooms are all just button mushrooms, white or brown. Kind of.
Unless you're talking about baby bellas.
You can swap the different button mushrooms back and forth, and it won't ridiculously change.
It's like lima beans and butter beans. One is a different varietal. Butter beans are not the same as lima beans. They're just not. And people are like, yes, they are. They're baby limas. And it's like, no, they are not.
Yeah, they aren't exactly the same. They have a slightly
same
different flavor,
genus. Same genus.
In a pinch,
different
you
subspecies.
can swap them. Yeah, it's one of those, in a pinch, you can swap them. And in England, they do use the name coriander interchangeably.
With, meaning cilantro.
Yeah. And then also with the sorted food guys, they always go for the most ridiculous American version of cilantro rather than just cilantro.
Yeah, I know. They're like cilantro. And it's like, okay, there's only a part of the country that pronounces it that way.
Yep.
Stop it. It's like, stop. You jerks.
The rest just say cilantro, which it's strange that they go for cilantro because cilantro would work far better in the English mouth than cilantro.
Yeah, but there'll be coriander or cilantro. And it's stop it. Who the hell? Who are you digging at? Because it's
northeastern seaboard.
Yeah, probably. Or
because that's
some of the Midwest.
Most of the Midwest I hear say cilantro.
They've had enough exposure. They're going after their own people. Well, actually, no, not them, because they're all from southern.
Well, if they're going after the Midwest, then that would be a shit ton of the Norse.
Yeah.
The Midwest is just peopled by Germanic tribes.
Yeah, with some of the Scots-Irish migration in it. But overall in the South, I hear most people say cilantro. I think most people learned about the herb from Mexican restaurants, so they tend to use that broad A anyway.
Yeah, they tend to go for the more mild cilantro.
Hey, Camel had said the retarded part. No doubt in response to what part of the country. Yeah.
California doesn't do cilantro normally, so it isn't.
Yeah, but there's a lot of retarded part. There's a lot of retarded part in the Northeast.
True. It's been something that has been driving me up the wall recently. The sheer number of things that people will speak so confidently about with zero goddamn information. One of the ones that really pisses me off is the sheer number of people that talk about inflation. And they're using the Keynesian-derived definition of inflation, where inflation is just the increase in prices of goods.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
why you can't be surprised that they only use the Keynesian, because the Keynesian has been the only modeling taught in business schools for years.
Well, the thing is that when it comes to economics, there's a shit ton of different schools. A lot of them are still taught fairly widely.
Yeah, but there's an enormous amount of Keynesian.
And Plague, I have no clue what fucking Californians you've spoken to. I sound like no Californian.
No, he really doesn't.
But when it comes down to the definition, a lot of economics schools don't teach it as it is just the increase in prices of goods, because you have the
Prices of services and prices of
you have the
commodities.
Chicago school, which uses a slightly overly broad definition to my mind, because it makes allowance for inflation hiding a increase in efficiency. Because the way that they phrase it is, it's too much cash chasing too few goods. Which, as long as the rate of inflation of the currency matches the rate of efficiency developed in the making of goods, then you can end up with a zero inflation, according to them, despite you printing off more money.
Because they're including efficiency.
Yeah. Because when more goods are made, that's should be dropping the price. As the supply relative to demand increases, you should see a drop in price. With the Chicago definition, it ends up that you can have this balance, because if you aren't increasing by the same rate as the goods are increasing, then you can still see that drop in price, or you could see just as zeroing out if they're matching each other. When that's still inflation, because when you're talking about the price of goods, there's a bunch of different factors, but we'll look at two main factors. You have the change in the supply versus the demand, and you have the change in the money supply.
Yeah, the value of the currency.
Yep, changes in money supply come in inflation and deflation.
Right.
Changes in the supply relative to demand come in supply increase relative to demand, or demand increase relative to supply.
Right.
So if you have the rate of inflation match the rate at which the goods are increasing, then you can zero out. If you have the rate that goods are increasing increase faster than the supply of money, then the price can go lower while you're still having inflation. And this is one of the things that people constantly get wrong, because they'll point to specific time periods and they'll go, why is it that this time that is claimed to have one of the greatest rates of inflation also had a decrease in the price of goods? Because inflation isn't the price of goods. And you had
it's monetary.
The goods outstrip the rate of inflation of the currency, so price fell. That's how this happened. It's very easy to explain if you're looking at the full fucking problem.
Well, you can't talk about monetary supply now because it upsets people.
Yeah, and because there have been so many people in the right positions who will say absolutely ridiculous shit like the money supply has absolutely no effect.
Yeah, we're looking at you, Krugman and Robert Reich, and people who are absolutely lying out their asses.
Yeah. It was Yellen at the beginning of the inflationary crisis.
No, we're just talking about devaluation of currency. We're not talking about inflation. Bitch. In this instance, they're the same thing.
She was saying to everyone that there is no proven evidence that the money supply has any effect on inflation. What the fuck do you mean? That is the singular origin of inflation. You cannot have inflation.
One of them, yeah. It's not the only one, but it is a primary mover and shaker is devaluing the currency by money machine go brr.
Well, no, it is when you're going for the classic definition of inflation, which a lot of schools still do. It is the only source of inflation. It isn't the only source of the change in price, but it is the only source of inflation because inflation is an increase in the money supply.
Doesn't scarcity have... I thought scarcity had an impact.
In the old definition...
Like in fuel crises and that kind of thing, when you have...
you wouldn't...
Deep scarcity.
If you have fuel become more scarce, that's using more the Chicago definition.
Mm-hmm.
When you say, well, if the fuel becomes more expensive, then you're having inflation. That's kind of a cross between the Chicago definition and the Keynesian definition, because that is saying that the increase in price. Whereas if you go by the old definition, that's not inflation. That's an issue of the shift in supply and demand. When supply...
Yeah, falls, but scarcity falls under supply.
Yep, it falls under supply and demand, which is the other component of the price change. Whereas in the old definition of inflation, inflation was entirely monetary policy. And inflation influenced the change in price, but it was not the change in price. Nor was it...
It drove the inflation. It was the printing of money.
It was that the more money that you have... So, with the old definition of inflation...
Against
you're familiar with force diagrams, right?
Yeah, maybe.
They were used in physics classes a lot, and are used in physics classes a lot, where they show, like, all the different forces acting upon an object. So you'll draw gravity and the force of the Earth pushing back up on the object to cancel out gravity. And then you'll have acceleration as well as brake force or friction going in the opposite direction. So if you're picturing a force diagram, it would be you have inflation and deflation. Those are opposing forces, but only one can be active at any given time because they're vector forces. And then you have the shift in supply relative to demand, and it shifts towards surplus or it shifts towards deficit. And those, again, are vector forces. Only one of them can be active at a time. But if you have a shift towards surplus as well as inflation and deficit drive prices up, surplus and deflation drive prices down. So you can have those two cancel out. You can have the surplus exceed the money supply. You can have the deficit end up driving prices up faster than deflation is able to decrease the prices. You can have a bunch of different ways that these interact. So you have to look at them and figure out what the net is between them. That's the issue, that when you're talking about a supply deficit, like when we had the oil crisis, where the amount of oil relative to demand decreased. Prices for everything went up. Prices for everything went up because it became more expensive to get the oil. And this is why I said that there's more than just these two factors. You also have the cost of production, the cost of distribution.
Cost of doing business, yep.
So you have all these other factors. And those prices can change as well. But a fair chunk of the time, it's more the original two, and then those will sometimes factor in rather than those always factoring in, because when you're talking about a change in price, it only matters what the change in the variables is, not what the initial value of the variables are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of people that keep on trying to use it's just the increase in the price of goods. No, it isn't. Because if you wanted to try to argue
demand side argument,
just the price of goods, Zimbabwe did not have an inflationary crisis.
Yeah. It's the people trying to insist that our demand for goods are driving inflation.
Yep. And
which is like, that would be nice if we were existing in a happy little bubble where since 2020 we hadn't been printing money like madmen. Well, we'd been printing it like madmen before then, but
it's slightly different than just saying that it's demand that drives inflation, because it is if you have price fixing, then you can have zero inflation despite printing money.
No, that is an impossible. Paging Richard Nixon.
Which is why I said that if someone is trying to argue that the change in prices, that the change in prices is what inflation is, well, then you have specific examples like Zimbabwe and intra-war period Germany.
Or maybe 1960s into late 60s into early 70s United States.
Well, in the United States, we didn't have the same degree of price fixing. I'm calling out those two specific examples.
But we had Nixon introduce wage and price control.
But what I'm talking about specifically is when you look at Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had price fixing throughout the entire country.
Of course they did, because communism's wonderful.
And it printed a fuck ton of money. The result of this was
Excel couldn't even track their currency.
Yeah, the number of goods that they were able to acquire was nowhere near what they needed. Mm-hmm. So despite in country, the price of a loaf of bread never changed. If you're trying to importing
the price of bread was to change dramatically.
Yep. So which is why you had the, what was it, $10 trillion note for the Zimbabwean dollar?
I don't remember what it was, but it was absolute horror.
Yeah.
You know, they went from a net exporting company to a completely collapsed economy.
Yep. And that's the thing.
The sole net export sub-Saharan state collapsed their economy.
Yep.
Because communism is good.
Like I said, it's if you consider only the rise in price inflation, then you would have to say Zimbabwe never had an inflationary crisis.
You know what Mugabe did? He Lysenko'd his economy.
Yep. It always happens.
Of course it does. Road to hell being paved with all these good intentions, carried out by ignoramuses who don't understand how any of it works.
Mm-hmm.
And marry to it a philosophy of racist Pan-Africanism, it gets even worse. Yep. Because you drive away from that economy all the people, not all, but most of the people with the skill set to keep your vital infrastructure afloat.
Yep, and you drive away the foreign investment as well, which China's currently going through.
Oh, yeah, well, pity the fools.
Because China is, again, adopting a lot of the old Maoist policies.
Yes.
And
yes, because Winnie the Pooh is an idiot.
Yep.
He is not. I mean, it's oh God, everything old is new again. This is the thing that is so frustrating. that within 80 years, you can watch people utterly and completely repeat the shit they swore they never were going to repeat.
Yep. And you still have
different cast of characters. Yeah.
You still have chuckle fucks outside that will look at it and go, well, no, we need to look at the Chinese miracle. That's the phrase that keeps on being tossed out by certain people.
What fucking Chinese miracle?
And
I mean, my God.
The Chinese miracle drives me up the fucking wall. Because there was no Chinese miracle.
Of course there wasn't.
What happened was that you had the U.S. and Western nations that prior to the Chinese Revolution, they had already dipped starvation to nearly zero.
Right.
It wasn't entirely zero, but it was nearly zero. They had tanked the absolute poverty rate again to nearly zero. It wasn't absolute zero, but it was nearly zero. The relative poverty rate did increase. This is one of the strange things. When you decrease the absolute poverty rate, you tend to have an increase in relative poverty rate.
Well, yeah, especially, I mean, it's how the metric is tracked. The mean, the median, and it confuses people because when you grow economies to the extent that the West did in the post-war period, your poor may increase, but their standard of living increased exponentially. So you have richer poor people than you ever had before, even though you have more, in quotes, poor people, because you're using a median.
So do you want to explain?
And who falls below the median and who, when you start doing median income valuations like that, it doesn't give the actual picture of the standard of living of the individual.
So do you want to explain the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty, or do you want me to?
Please, you.
Just to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
Yes, you do.
So
it's yours.
Absolute poverty is when you have an inability to cover the necessities. So you are unable to afford your food, your housing, and that's pretty much the two things factored into absolute poverty. If you aren't able to feed yourself, you aren't able to get some type of shelter, you are in absolute poverty. Relative poverty is if you make a certain percent less than the wealthier people in your nation.
Isn't it done by median?
In some nations, it's done by median. Some nations are trying to go over to the wealth inequality calculation, which is...
Of course they are. Of course they are.
Insanity.
It is, because, I mean, poor people who have big screen TVs and iPhones are not poor in the eyes of somebody in Zimbabwe.
Yep. And this is something that I actually...
And they don't even do it globally, because I told you when Cree was in Harare for that conference, and that's been, Jesus, close to 10 years ago or more, actually. There was a guy cutting grass around the property with a pair of scissors for his $1 a day, which was the average income for the Zimbabwean. Now, the guys working in the factories were making better money than that, working in the tobacco factory, and they got 2 meals because the company recognized that even what they were paying them wasn't good enough. And I mean, they could get 2 meals, they could take one home. Because the economy was so horrible. That you're just trying to keep body and soul together. And, people were surviving on $1 a day. So absolute poverty in Zimbabwe was probably 80 cents a day. So if anybody had a vice, they were done for. But we don't do any global metric on this stuff because everybody is so hung up on wealth inequality.
Which is the biggest nothing stat that you can imagine.
Well, it's imaginary numbers, because whose wealth are you going to pick? And it's all mixed up in this stakeholder versus shareholder.
Well, the
viewpoint, and I hate it because it's wrongheaded.
The way that I always talk about the wealth inequality argument is without looking into what the origin of wealth inequality is. It's like finding out that a room that you did not know the starting temperature of, you don't know what the temperature of the room should be, and you don't know why the temperature of the room has done so, has increased by 4 degrees. That tells you fuck all. That could be good, that could be bad, that could be indifferent. Because you have a bunch of different reasons. Is the room increasing by 4 degrees because there's a fire in the corner and it is just reached 4 degrees warmer at this point? Is the room 5 degrees or 4 degrees warmer when it was already 88 degrees, so now it's 92
right
degrees?
You have no baseline information is what you're getting at. And
you have nothing to tell you whether or not it's actually bad, because there's good reasons, there's bad reasons, there's indifferent reasons.
It can be a mix of reasons. There is a wage gap that has been widening in our country, no doubt about it, and it is a problem. It's a problem because it's twofold.
It could be a problem.
I think it is. This is just my opinion. It could be, it might not be, but there are several different forces at work here. Part of it is they're not adjusting their metrics on one side or the other of the Great Society government programs. So you can look at 1950s statistics, but unless you adjust for the changes that occurred in, for want of a better term, the welfare state in the mid-1960s, then you're talking about 2 completely different economic environments where there was nowhere near that kind of safety net. And hell, you can't go back and look at the 1920s, because then you have to factor in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all these other things.
So there was something that I looked into, because, like I said, I've been getting into arguments with people about this type of shit fairly frequently. So I actually put together a bunch of different numbers and a bunch of different sources. There's the common line that the middle class is dying. And normally they'll trace this back to Reagan. The thing that people always tend to leave out is that 2/3 of everyone that has left the middle class since Reagan have moved up, not down.
Right.
Because when you look at one of the main sources that people use when they bring up this sort of stat is there was the Pew poll, if I remember correctly, that was looking into this. And they did a analysis as well as the poll. So it wasn't just polling data, but used other data that they were able to get. And it showed in the chart a 4% fall in, or 4% increase in the number of people that were in poverty, or 4 additional, not an increase of 4%. So the difference between that mathematically is the difference of plus 4% and the difference of 1.04 times the number that it started. This was plus 4% increase in the number, or in the percentage of poor people. So
based on whatever the determinant was.
Based on what the current rate of, or current poverty level was determined by the federal government.
Right.
Or not.
Right there. It was, you got cooking of the numbers right there.
Yes, there is cooking of the numbers. It wasn't
bullshit baked in your cake.
It wasn't the poverty level, because this was talking about a 4% increase in low class. So it was the government determination of what qualifies as low class. So the qualification, as Prospero just pointed out, of what is low class has been increasing. So you can earn more and more money and still be determined as low class. The thing is that the determination for what is middle class and upper class have likewise risen. Even with that, though, you had in the chart a 4% increase, and in the chart a 7% increase. I say it's 2/3 because when you look at the actual data that they used, it comes out to something like 3.5% increase in the first, and then 7% increase in the second. 7 is 2 times 3.5.
It's good. It's good enough. Don't spurg out on me here. It's good enough for the course of the discussion.
Yep. So you have,
for the tale being told,
2/3 of everyone that leaves the middle class moves up, not down. That's one thing that people seem to have a hard time understanding, because you constantly hear about the middle class is dying. Everyone's becoming poor. If 2/3 of them are moving up in class, they didn't become poorer, now did they?
Well, there's a fair bit of gerrymandering.
Yep, like I said, they've been shifting all the guidelines
the definitions,
up, which means 2/3 that have gone up by a lot, because if they hadn't gone up by a lot, they would still be considered middle class, because the limits of all the classes have been shifted up, not down.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of the people that moved down, they didn't actually lose money. They weren't earning less now than they earned before. What happened is that
they got recategorized.
The limit was moved above them, so now they've been moved.
They got recategorized.
Now they're below the limit
by shifting the rules of the game.
Yep, by shifting the boundaries of low class, they're now low class, even though nothing about their lifestyle has changed.
Yeah, it's naked. It is naked political, eco-political gerrymandering.
Yep. So
because if you speak for lower class Americans, as the DNC has always cloaked itself in virtue and claimed to do, meanwhile shitting all over them, that's just it's a game of nomenclature.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do polling, are you better off now or are you not? A lot plays into that.
Yep, and I have information that I was going to go into with that as well.
Yeah, because that is a perception game. Mm-hmm. And even people who are doing quite well can feel that year over year they're not doing as well as they were the year before.
Yep.
So even though their wealth is increasing, not decreasing, they perceive it is decreasing.
Yep.
Because year over year, their improvement is narrowing. And
well, it's not even necessarily that it's narrowing. there's other things at play. So one of the things that I did when I was discussing this sort of topic with people was I was actually looking into the price of different goods over time. One of the ones is an amusing one just because someone was trying to say that Microsoft didn't do anything really for the general public, and its money was ill-gotten gains, shall we say. So what I did was I looked at how much computers cost before Microsoft versus after Microsoft. Because one of the things that Microsoft did was they became extremely efficient at producing computers for a period of time.
The popularization of the PC.
Yep. And they absolutely tanked its price. So do you want to guess how much the average computer, and well, not quite the average, it was the bargain level computer before Microsoft was? In the money of the time, or if you can guess it in modern day money, I'd be rather surprised.
Shit, no, I couldn't do it in modern day money. I did. The first computer I had was one I used along with Cree that was a Frankenstein box. So I don't have numbers.
So the first personal computers were technically released in 1972. They were $95,000 in 1972, which, if you do a inflation adjustment,
I wouldn't actually look at 72 because there was just no market.
Well, the main thing was that it was very difficult to make a personal computer affordable at that time because the efficiencies hadn't been made.
Right, which is why there was no market. You have to jump 20 years ahead to see.
Well, the thing is that Microsoft started in late 72, early 73. So I use that specifically because, again, I said,
I understand because there were business systems.
Do you happen to know how much 95K in 1972 would be worth in today's currency?
Oh God, what about 180,000?
$697,843.
Yeah, I forget how many years it's been, Sanguine. You see, in my head, I'm not as old as I am, and I have to remind myself that was 60 years.
So, do you know what a bargain
60 years ago, 52 years ago?
Do you know what a bargain computer costs currently?
No.
You can get a really bargain computer for about $200 in today's currency. So, if you factor in inflation, it was a decrease in price from $697,843.18 to about $200 in the time frame of Microsoft's operation.
Yeah.
Then when you look at gas prices, a lot of people look at gas and they say gas is so ridiculously expensive. And it is more expensive when you look at the dollar amount.
Adjusted for inflation.
Yep. So a lot of people were comparing recent fuel prices to the price of fuel under Carter's administration. And there are even people saying that Carter's administration's gas prices weren't as bad as today's gas prices.
No, that's not true.
So I did look into it.
That's not true because based on inflation, it's just that under Carter, there was a shocking increase.
Yes, you have the absolute right of it because during Carter's presidency, gas apparently reached $3.82 per gallon, which, quick calculation, in adjustment, that means that in today's dollar, that would have been $20.61 per gallon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just it moved from, in a 10-year span, gas moved up so much. And during Carter's administration, the final leaps and bounds were taken during that particular fuel crisis. Among other fuel crises of the 70s. It's, God, what a decade that was. I try not to remember it. Thanks. It wasn't a happy decade.
Yeah, it was not, but that was something that
we had what we had and what we see now over the last 8 years. Going back to the decline in gas prices under Trump, with trying to move toward energy independence.
Then at the lowest point of Trump to now, yes, there has been a price increase.
Yeah,
but
another
from
kind of
10 years ago to now, there hasn't been an increase. In fact, there's been a decrease from 10 years ago to now. And it's one of those things that,
adjusted for inflation,
you have to adjust for inflation, because the thing that other people don't realize
the
is
sticking point is always the inflation.
It is the inflation, but when you're talking about the median and mean income have outstripped inflation. Median income, not by very much. It's something like 6% increase over inflation. So that's not by much, but it's still outstripping inflation. And the mean income has done better than the median.
Mm-hmm.
It's something like 12% over inflation rate.
The problem is always buried within certain sectors of the.
Yep.
Of
the thing is that when you're looking at the price of things, everything with the exception of habitation and education have decreased in price and or massively increased in quality. So one of the ones that people constantly bring up is medical care.
Yeah.
One of the things that people tend to forget when it comes to medical care is that medical care of now is not medical care of 10 years ago. Isn't medical care of 20 years ago or 30 years ago. The further back, the more drastic the change is.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at a item versus item comparison, prices are down. When you look at a treatment versus treatment, prices are the same or up, but the treatment is far different.
Mm-hmm. Not necessarily better, but far different. I'd say there have been vast improvements in certain sectors. I think in 20 years, when somebody goes back and does this kind of quality of life assessment, there's going to have been a significant blip in the radar in the last 3 years and potentially the next 10.
Oh, quite possibly. But what I'm saying is that when you're comparing the past to now, generally, you see a decrease in price, increase in quality. And in the few things that people tend to point to as an increase in price when it comes to medical care, it's that they're looking at a treatment increase.
Improved outcomes.
And you have massively improved outcome, very different treatment. So yeah, it's a different price for a different treatment. Even though they were both for Cancer X. Cancer X 10 years ago is treated very differently than Cancer X now.
Yeah, the efficacy.
Yep. And
It's
one of the other
increment. It's inch improvements. It's
it keeps on building and it keeps on improving. One of the other things that people will point to. It's
difficult because we are seeing data that is going to reverse some of that.
Oh, some of it will, but when you're talking on the whole.
Yeah, on the whole, I'm more concerned
the ruled
about
holes.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about what the downstream effects of the last 3 years, 2 years in particular.
Oh yeah, like I've said, there's a bunch of problems that I have with.
I can't talk about that because you're not supposed to. But you know,
even when people actually understand the research and can cite the specific research.
Oh yeah, but none of that
and talk about it
is real. Don't you understand? Yep. It's all made up. Go ask Dr. John Campbell how he feels about that.
Yep. So one of the other things that people tend to point to as an item that has massively increased in price is cars.
Not really.
Yeah, I looked into cars and I decided to compare because the person that I was engaging with at this particular point was saying that cars used to be so much less expensive in the 1990s. So I decided to look at a car smack dab in the 1990s that I knew was still made to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the Toyota Corolla, the 1995 Toyota Corolla.
Okay.
So in 1995, it was $13,782.
Yeah.
Which, adjusting for inflation, in today's money would be $27,324.35. So, do you know what the price of a 2020 Toyota Corolla when it was released was?
Mm-mm.
So, looking at the same level, so I didn't do like the high-end one versus the low-end one. I looked at the mid-range of each, or rather the starting price of each. It was $21,900, which means that it was a just shy of $6,000 cheaper.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? Between 1980 and 1985, no, 1990. When did you took 95, right?
95.
Okay, it doubled in price between 81 and 95.
Yep.
I had a base two-door hatchback Corolla, 1981, which was 6,000 and change. And it was 13,000. Now,
13,095. Yeah.
Right. And it has not doubled again and again.
Nope. It has
since then.
It is cheaper now.
One of the reasons is they started making them here.
Factoring for inflation.
Yeah, and they started making them in the States.
Yep, and one of the main things
cut back costs, believe it or not.
And one of the things is that when you look at the difference between those cars, the 2020 Corolla, far better car than the 95. Because it can go faster, it has much greater fuel efficiency, has higher survivability in a crash, better safety features. On every objective measure,
it's a better.
You would find that it's a better vehicle, and it's $6,000 cheaper when you're accounting for inflation.
Yep.
Then one of the other claims that people tend to make is that people are worse off now, and that people will feel poorer now than they did earlier. So you have a lot of middle-class people that don't feel middle class.
Housing is the thing that has had the greatest impact, I think, on the psychology of this.
Housing has had probably one of the largest impacts, but one of the other things that had a massive impact is the sheer amount of shit that we own. Because I decided they were using the 80s in the example when they said that people feel poorer now.
Yeah.
So I decided to look at what the average family in the 80s actually owned.
Yeah.
The average family in the 80s did not have AC, they did not have a PC, let alone multiple PCs or laptops. If they had a TV, and not all the households had a TV, they would have, on average, one 27 to 32-inch fat body CRT. They had, on average, one car, no cell phones, no game systems. Families that were better off tended to have one game system, maybe two game systems, but the average family had no game systems.
Hello, Atari.
90% owned a vacuum cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Most didn't have dishwashers. 79% had washing machines. Fewer had dryers.
This is in the 80s?
This is in the 80s.
Oh, that actually surprises me a little bit. But yeah, no, I didn't have, I didn't live in a house with access to a washer dryer until I moved back in with my mom.
Yep.
I went to the laundromat in the apartment complex.
Yep.
We did have a dishwasher. It was a 70s era apartment complex, and they had put a dishwasher in it.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I'm thinking household, it was 3 gals renting an apartment.
Yep.
There were 2 TVs. One belonged to the gal who had the master bedroom, so she paid like $20 more a month than the other 2 of us who had the smaller bedrooms and shared a bath. And she's the one, I think, who bought the Atari system. And we had a TV, and it was somebody's family TV that got passed down to them. Kind of thing. It was the old solid state, heavy as fuck.
Yep.
TV.
An old fat body CRT.
Yeah, because, we had, when my parents moved back here in 1981, they brought with them the console TV, the color console TV that they bought in 1973, because we didn't have a color television until 73.
Yep.
Everybody else I knew had one, save like one family, and we didn't get one. We had a one that was on like a little rolly cart. And it wasn't until my grandfather died that the house had 3 TVs in it. And one of them was like a late 50s, early 60s serious box.
Yep.
Serious box. The thing was only 18 inches wide.
Yep.
18 inches deep, and it was a brick. It was we had our old dead black and white down in the basement, but it wasn't used. That was a case of bringing junk with you. But that actually, that TV was used. They brought it and realized that it wasn't, the antenna wasn't working for shit. And so got the portable brick on the rolling cart. And that TV was in the den, and that was a privilege, not a right.
Yep. Yeah, if I remember looking up the numbers correctly, I think it was the number of families that currently own 3 or more TVs exceeds the rate of the number of families in the 80s, or sorry, the percentage of the families in the 80s that
even had one.
Single.
Yeah, I live in a house with 4 TVs. I mean, one's a computer monitor.
Yep.
Well, technically 2 of them are computer monitors that double as TVs. And the new one we got because of new space is a smart TV, so technically it's a great big monitor.
Yep.
The other one's a more traditional big screen that still has some HDMI connections that we're hanging on to because everything else is going the way of the dodo. And we still have DVDs. We still have VHS.
Yep.
You know, because I live in a highly disposable culture brought up through a time period of not highly disposable.
Yep.
The only reason I had a VCR as early as I did was when I moved in with my mom. The interest rates were so high, she wanted to open a CD, and they were giving away. The banks were giving away VCRs, and this was a 2-piece one. You know, if you wanted to record, you carried one section around with you. The other wiring of that shit was just hilarious, by the way. I was the only one who knew how to use it. But they also were giving away microwaves. I mean, the banks' interest rates were so high. Trying to get people to invest money in CDs, they were giving away shit like you wouldn't believe. So if you actually had some scratch to move into a CD, you did it because they gave you shit.
Yep.
If we replaced the lethal microwave that was a 70s era microwave.
Yep.
And do you know that microwave lived into the 90s?
Damn.
Still functioning. Didn't, well, you know, I don't think anybody with a pacemaker ever got near it. But, you know, and the one that we got that replaced it didn't last 10 years. Yeah, it's, you know, the planned obsolescence sped up also.
And I think, I'm not sure how, I know that planned obsolescence is a thing, but I'm not sure if it's as big as many people think. I think that there's a fair chunk of survivorship bias that's at play when it comes to talking about it, because people will always bring up, look at, there's old Cadillacs that are still running. Yeah, there's also a shit ton of old Cadillacs that are crushed and in junkyards.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the best people to talk to about that are appliance repair people.
Yep.
What causes, it's not so much planned obsolescence as cost of replacement parts.
Yep.
When it is going to cost half of the appliance to repair it, most people are going to say, fuck you, and they'll get a new one.
Yep. Which, like I said, I have a feeling that a lot of it is that it's that and it's survivorship bias.
Yeah, I did.
How much more reliable things in the past were. I think it's just the ones that we remember are the more reliable ones.
Well, I've experienced some of it because microwaves, we went through a little run until we found a model that seems to be a 5-year plus model. Now, that 1970s era one that got given to someone else and then given by that person to someone else that continued to function into the 90s, I think that's an outlier. But I did find that the lifespan on the microwaves dropped from 8 years to 5 years. The usage didn't really change. I don't put metal in microwaves. I don't misuse them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't microwave everything I eat.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to say it out loud because I don't want anything to happen to the one I have now.
Yep.
I really like it. But it's so far so good. But I'll tell you, you heard me bitching about the goddamn oven I have.
Oh,
It took 3 different tries to repair it, and it turned out to be a wire.
Mm-hmm.
But to have somebody say to you, don't use the self-cleaning function on the oven, that's what breaks most ovens.
Yep.
And I'm thinking self-clean technology has been a thing for 40 years.
Yep.
That's not a new thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
What the tap dancing fuck are you talking about?
Yep.
Because you reach a certain age and you're like, let me explain something to you. I'm not buying Easy Off and I'm not crawling inside the goddamn oven to clean it. It's why I got a self-clean oven in the first place. But they put absolutely no shielding whatsoever.
But that's one of the things
in our
that I feel like
it wasn't the control panel. It turned out it was a bad wiring.
Ah, okay.
A bad wire.
Like I said, that's one of the things that I feel like over time people are more likely to remember the good products than the shit ones.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be nostalgic. I'm trying
there were always
to
the
remember
ones that
time periods.
Yeah, there were always the ovens that were the designer was stupid. They didn't put in shielding, and it caused a fire, or it just burnt itself up and ceased functioning. So there's been a chunk of them that have done that. I think it's just because it's the newer generation. A lot of people are going, well, this one keeps on having all the issues. Yeah, it's a new gen oven. It's going to have... And you're going to have the same stupid shit that people come up with every 5-10 years is going to pop up in your new oven because
and you get mergers between companies and balls get dropped. They start, and there are so many different gradations within things like ovens, ranges, microwaves, this, that, and the other, because there's builder level, which a new home builder will put in your home, which is the cheap ass one. And then there are upgrades from that. And that's where people can borrow a fair bit of trouble by not doing it. They just accept what's put in, or they're like, I don't want to spend the extra, $500 to upgrade the oven or whatever. And I understand that because of home costs being what they are.
And going slightly back, this all sums up with everything that I've laid out when it comes to prices, and with the fact that wages have, on average and in the median, outstripped inflation. Also, one of the numbers that I haven't mentioned yet is, do you know how many hours fewer we work on average now than we did in the... Everyone tends to look at the 60s as kind of a golden age of when a person could have a single income and afford a family. So, do you know how many fewer hours we work now than in the 60s?
Per week?
On average, per week.
15?
Very close. It's about 14 and change.
Yep, that would account for some of the misery that people are claiming they're suffering from.
So, we earn more. Everything except for habitation and education are cheaper. And we work fewer hours. So the money that we earn with less time goes further. The main reason why people feel like they aren't as well off as they once were is because the massive increase in what we have to own in order to consider ourselves of X class or Y class.
Yeah.
If
keeping up with the Joneses syndrome.
Yep. If someone were to, in the modern day, equip their home as someone in the 80s did, you would find yourself far better off than the person in the 80s ever was.
Yeah, and you'd have a computer because you would have the monitor serving as your TV as well as the thing your computer was attached to.
Yep. And that was one of the things.
And you wouldn't have to have a VCR or any of those things. You'd have that all, that's all integrated.
Yep.
Because you have the computer to call it all up with the streaming services and the that's, which are cheaper.
Yep. And if I remember correctly,
than going to the movies.
If I remember correctly, when I looked into it, the number of computers per household has more than doubled since the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can believe that. Because I have a laptop, I have an iPad, and I have a cell phone. Yep. All three of them are computers.
Well, the thing is, those stats weren't including cell phones. If you include cell phones, it has more than doubled.
Mm-hmm.
Because it went from, in the 90s, when I was growing up, families had a home line, a house line. And then maybe one or both of the parents would have a cell phone.
Yep.
That was about it.
I didn't have I tell you, my first cell phone, put it in big quotation marks.
Yep.
Was the kind that you plugged into the cigarette lighter.
Yep.
In the car, and it was in a carrying case.
Yep.
It was heavier than your average VCR.
Yep.
And you could take it in and plug it into the wall and use it. But, you know, what kind of cell towers did we have? You know, I mean, it was very, very limited. As far as in the 90s, I had I guess that you would call it like a Motorola flip phone.
Mm-hmm.
Blocky thing that you basically put in a holster.
Mm-hmm.
I never had a pager. I was fortunate there. But when the iPhone came out, I was grateful to have a slimmer, easy to drop in the purse kind of phone or stick in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the phone I currently have, I don't even know what iteration it is. We don't buy the latest because it's a fucking phone. It's nice that it does other things. I mean, I love being able to Google something on it, and I like being able to, you know, I can pop into Discord or whatever and do it, but I mean, the screen's not great, you know. But I can, if I'm out or in a circumstance where I can't have my iPad or laptop with me, I make do with it. But by and large, I still view it as that fucking phone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't live on it. Don't live on my iPad. I don't live on my laptop. I'm not of the generation that did. I am more tech literate from that standpoint of using the things relatively fluently than a fair bit of my peer group, which is surprising because my peer group is the one that was working when all this stuff came into being.
Mm-hmm.
Sanguine, I can't tell you how many people out here reply all to emails.
Yep.
I can make a fortune At $20 a throw, showing these people how not to reply all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I'd be happy to do it. And I'm sure a fool and their money would soon be parted if they haven't figured out how to reply to sender. I mean, 30 people are emailed in a group email for a particular reason. And then all of a sudden I start getting email notifications. And it's like, what the fuck is going on? And I'm looking, don't any of you know how to reply to sender? I guess not. And it is not that significantly different between Gmail or AOL or Verizon.net or whatever they're using.
Yeah, it's one of those things that...
See those little dots up in the corner? Are you not the least bit curious?
Or just hit the reply, because typically it's reply comes first and then reply all appears.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you just
or
hit
you've got
the
a little
reply
arrow.
rather than reply all.
The iPhone's got the little arrow that points at the sender. Jesus Christ. And I mean, we had a nightmare of the situation where it was a community-wide message that was sent out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sent out to 200 and some households, I guess at the time, or maybe 300, 200 some. And it started a shitstorm of fury, partially because what the initial email was about. Mm-hmm. Informational, but it did involve a candidate for
public office, shall we say?
Yes. For, Hanover Board of Supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think our community email should be used for political purposes. Okay. I ended up with like 20 notifications from people who couldn't simply reply to the person who sent it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's 10% of the people that receive this can't use email properly. That's hideous.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who were doing it, one person said, please stop using reply all because it's her business email. She had to send another message saying, stop, for the love of God, stop hitting reply all. 2 hours later. Old people are stupid. Well, no, people are stupid. It's just there's a unique subset of old people that are spectacularly stupid. The techno-tartary that exists is disappointing. Especially when you look into what some of these people do for a living or did for a living. Up until very recently. I think some of them hit reply all because they want everybody to know what they think. Camel's got a good point. People are stupid. Some stupid people just lucky enough to grow old. You're not wrong. Mm-hmm. I am probably among them.
But yeah, it's like I said, so many things that people just have everything absolutely flipped on its head when it comes to. Because we're better off, again, everything save for education and habitation has either decreased and or massively increased in quality.
The habitation is the major rub.
Because the habitation is the major rub. And the thing is that Do you know two of the most heavily regulated markets within the economy?
Yeah. Renters.
Because it's not a coincidence that habitation and education are the two most expensive things,
Yep.
the only things that keep on increasing in cost. It's because we keep on having government decide what can and cannot function in those fields.
Yeah, and they have
rather than letting the market.
Thumb on the scales.
Yep.
And education in particular. Stop buying the bullshit, kids.
Yep.
Really, stop buying the bullshit. Community college is fine. ECPI is fine. If you don't know what you want to do for certain, and you're not interested in going into computers, STEM, medical support, like dental hygienist, radiation tech, those kinds of things, don't play their game. Don't play. I mean, B school, some B school people, depending upon what they want to go into, finance.
Yep.
The finance majors usually do pretty well.
If you know what you want to do with your major, go and get it. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what you want to do,
go to work.
But you know that you want to get a college degree of some sort, go to community college.
Yeah, and go to work.
And work. If you know that you don't need a degree, then go to work.
Go to technical school.
Yep. You can go to technical school, or there are certain jobs that you can
be
get
a plumber.
Without technical, you can get without any of that.
But be a plumber, be an electrician, be an HVAC person. For the love of God, do they need those people? You are going to be able to punch your own ticket in a very short period of time. The supply, the demand is far higher than the supply, which means your wages on entry level are going to be better than they've ever been. It's just everybody thinks they bought into this. You've got to have and there are too many employers who are insisting on college degrees for entry-level positions that no more require a college education than they do the person be a butterfly.
Well, it's because they have it available. And if you have it available, you might as well.
Yeah, but it's just... Oh, Harry is yelling. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, like I said, though, that's the mentality that if you have it available, why not? And that's what is causing a lot of that. There's a surplus of college-educated people that are looking for jobs. So, fuck it, I'll throw on a must-have a degree into this job because there's plenty of people with degrees needing jobs. Doesn't bother me at all.
All right, you going to answer at the Harry channel, or am I?
Hey, Harry. How it goes?
He has to be horrified. I'm up past my bedtime.
Oh, we're just bullshitting. If you have to go, we can call it early.
I am going to have to go pretty soon because it's almost 1. And, I get up early.
Do you want to do parting words now, then?
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
I've been up since, he's on motorcycle. He took the time at a stoplight to drive safely, Harry.
Yep.
Parting thoughts.
Yes, because I've gotten to blather and bullshit, and I've got to pull out a bunch of the.
Well, if I start on the thing that really, really, really annoys me right now, it'll be another half hour. Stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism.
Yep.
is a hideous thing. Don't buy into it. Not everybody has a stake in a company. The people who financially invest in companies have a stake in it, and that's called a share. And what they're trying to do is circumvent fiduciary responsibility, and it's how they're getting away with DEI.
Yep.
Because they would be held accountable for fiduciary
for taking money and pissing it up a rope.
Yeah. On top of the shareholders.
Yep.
That's what they're doing. And
they took a rope, they tied it to the ceiling, they then told their shareholders, here, bite this end. And then they whipped it out and started trying to piss up it.
Yeah. And it's exactly what you saw with the Davos crowd. It's a bunch of people who think they know better than everyone else. They are becoming unanswerable. The way they're managing stock, family stock held in perpetuity, things like that. So be careful what companies you invest in. Look for the ones that are dutifully seeking your proxy votes. Look,
And I've said it before. I think a large part of the issues that we're seeing is the middle management capture. Because middle management has been completely fucking overrun by absolute nut jobs. And upper middle management is too high up to give a shit about what happens to the workers. They're too far down to give a shit about what happens to the company long term. All they care about is what happens to the company while they're hired. If the company collapses the day after they leave,
they'll go to work.
It doesn't bother them.
They go to work in academia or the government. Interesting you brought that up. Recommended watch. Babylon Bee interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy today, and that was one of the things he was talking about was the revolving door between academe, government, and management. And that it is ferociously corrupted. It is full of people who are self-congratulatory twats, who are implementing government programs within the executive, unanswerable anywhere. And then, the administration changes. They get shown the door. They roll into academe. They train a whole bunch of new soldiers for the commissar. I'm bored with this. I'll go into XYZ company. It's either that or they sit on the fucking board. It is a lot of this management class, and kind of the way Argentina is approaching it currently, which is slash and burn. It requires a commitment to, as Vivek used the metaphor, there's no point in trying to rebuild a structure on a rotten scaffold. And the scaffolding is rotten. Kicking the scaffolding apart is scary because it means you actually have to concentrate and rebuild it. But that's what we're facing. Because these pricks are circle jerking their way through that mid-level. Did Jack Dorsey know everything that was going on at Twitter? Probably not.
Yeah, fuck no.
Yeah, I don't think he had. I think Elon's right. It was Jack was not malign. He was negligent, but not malign. He's wifty. Okay,
he was negligent in a way that
typical CEOs are negligent,
and I think pretty much anyone would be negligent. There's exceptions to that, but I think the average person would be negligent in the same fashion. They would go, this person has these criteria, so I can trust them to handle XYZ.
Yeah, and they come highly recommended from academe or from government or from wherever they come from. So it's that same group of players moving laterally across the board, and that is more of the swamp than some of the other places where you think the swamp might be.
It's one of the reasons why I say I think that it's that upper middle management capture, especially HR capture, for a lot of business.
Yeah. Oh,
because you have CEOs that when you get sufficiently high up in the company, you give a shit if the company survives. Because first off, that's your legacy. Second off, that's your retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So you care if the company survives. But then you have all your advisors.
Your director of HR doesn't necessarily give a shit.
All your advisors are hired by the HR department, and the HR department seems to, in the vast majority of instances, at the very least, care more about pushing their particular ideology and getting more people of their particular ideology into the right positions of power than they do about whatever organization they're actually a part of.
And also, HR departments are largely populated by women.
Yep.
It's a happy little home for women. It all began, they used to be called personnel departments.
Yep.
And they began shifting in the 80s predominantly toward human resources.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, God, that's a creepy term. There was a creepiness about it to me. And piece by piece by piece, when HR has to vet a computer programmer, when there isn't a single person in HR who knows jack diddly shit about computer programming, you've got a problem.
Oh, a good example from my own life was when I got hired for the lab job that I'm currently working. Mm-hmm. There was the first interview, which was a phone interview. And the person interviewing me over the phone said one of the important components of this job is that you have to have fairly good math abilities. And then they uttered a phrase that to this day has left me going, what the fuck is wrong with this? Because they said, and don't be worried, I'm not talking about anything ridiculous. And then they gave examples of things that they considered ridiculous. One was a 3-digit number multiplied by a percentage. I immediately said the answer to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's entirely something that is within the realm of you're working in a laboratory. The SOP tells you how to make X number of liters. You need to make 33% of X number of liters.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make this reagent? That's a very common bit of mental math that you have to do in a laboratory. And then they went, is that the answer? Yes, that's the answer. Oh, okay then. And then they gave their second example, which was multiplying a 3-digit number by a 2-digit number. And again, I gave them the answer very quickly after they said the numbers, because that's just how my brain works. And again, multiplying a 3-digit number by a 2-digit number is the sort of shit that you do in laboratory quite often.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you're trying to scale something. So rather than scaling it down, you're now scaling it up. Or you're trying to figure out, okay, I have this much of this reagent. How much of this reagent do I need? So you calculate it that way. But that was HR. Those were HR's 2 examples of ridiculous mental math that aren't the sort of thing that would be necessary for the job. Both of them are entirely necessary to the job. And both of them are also really simple to do mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And this made far more sense later when I had a trainee that I was trying to train up. So there's something that I have to do every day at my job when I'm assigned a certain task, Prospero.
Uh-huh.
And it involves timing something out correctly.
Okay.
So I have one means of delaying things. And it's a specific thing that I can run, and it takes 15 minutes per run of that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it works is when I'm waiting for a specific thing to finish, I have to make sure that it runs as soon after it finishes as it possibly can. So I'll figure out the amount of time between when it is currently and when that thing will finish running. And I figure out how many 15-minute segments there are.
Right.
And then I load that number of samples in so that it runs at the right time. That makes sense, right?
Yes.
So I was training up someone, new hire, and I explained to them exactly what it was, only using the proper terms, not the vague terms that can be slightly confusing. And it was an hour and 15 minutes.
Yes.
So that was the amount of time that was needed between when it was and when the thing that we needed to run as soon after that hour and 15 as we could. And it was really nice because it was exactly an hour and 15 minutes. So I went, okay, this thing takes 15 minutes to run. How many do we have to load up in order to make sure that we run this at the right time? And they thought for a moment.
Yes.
And then they looked at me and they said, 3.
What?
And I said, no, it takes 15 minutes. So that is 3 times 15. That's 45 minutes. 45 minutes is less than an hour and 15 minutes. So for an hour and 15 minutes, how many do we need? She thought again. And after a couple moments, she gave another answer. Her second answer was 2.
Oh, fuck me.
2's less than 3. 3 was not sufficient in order to get to the hour and 15 minutes that we had to get in order for this to work out.
Oh, God. Did you ever say 75 minutes?
45 minutes is 30 minutes too few. 30 being less than 45 is now 45 minutes too few.
Oh, so you gave her the 75 minutes to put 15 into to come up with 5, but she couldn't.
Oh, I gave her that you gave me the 2 numbers that when you add together, it equals the 75.
75, yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying.
And then I said, so how many do we need to run?
Because you actually gave her the equation to 5 because she said 2 is 30, 3 is 45, and we need 75.
Yep.
3 plus 2.
She thought for a moment. Do you want to guess what her answer was?
Oh, God. 1.
3. It was wrong the first time, you vapid cunt.
Oh, my God. She went back to 3.
She went back to 3.
Oh, good God. Sweetie. 15 plus 15 plus 15 plus 15 is 60. which is a whole hour, and then you get an extra 15. And that's an hour and 15 minutes. Even if you had to do it, even if you had seen her go 15, 30, 45, 60, hour 15 on her fingers, you would have
I would have been perfectly fine.
You would have been more relieved.
Yeah.
Much more relieved. Did you try her on 20? How many 20-minute increments fit into 60?
Well, the thing is that
because you've said that answer twice before, you idiot bitch. Try it again.
Yeah, I cut out a fair chunk of my explanation to her in between because what I said already was enough that everyone should have been able to go, well, if 3's 45 and 2 is 30, and we're looking for an hour and 15, that's 45 plus 30, so that's 3 plus 2. Boom. Yeah. 5. Yeah. Yeah. But I had more explanation in this than just that, because I had stated that each of these, again, they're 15 minutes. So each is a quarter of an hour. We're looking for 5 quarters of an hour.
Yes, that's 1 hour.
How many quarters of an hour fit into 5 quarters of an hour? I also said this is 15 minutes. We're looking for 75 minutes. How many minutes work into 75 minutes? So I said an hour and 15, which that should have been easy math right then. Yes. Hour 15 divided by 15 minutes, easy. I said 15 minutes or 75 minutes divided by 15 minutes, easy. I also, again, gave 5/4 of an hour divided by 1/4 of an hour.
5. It's 5. For the love of God, it's 5.
And again, the answers
3
that I was given: 3, 2, 3.
Nope, that's 7. You're wrong. Oh, that would be 1 3/4 hours. Never mind. Oh, God. That's sad.
But yeah, it was infuriating.
On behalf of my sex, it hurts. It hurts. It hurts that she can't do simple arithmetic.
Yep. But it was parting words because you needed to hit the hay. So what do you want your parting words to be?
Oh, people, stop being so stupid. Opt out of public education if you can with your children. Honest to God, with sticks and rocks in the backyard, you can do better than, obviously, what colleges are producing. And definitely better than HR departments are producing.
I forgot, my job requires a BS in a science. So this is someone who had a BS that wasn't able to do that math.
It's a good thing I'm going to die soon. Relative to the time that so many of you have left to live. God. Oh my God.
Yep. I'll leave off with my standard, though, of if you're passionate about something, make sure that you devour it. Don't let it devour you. And with that, have a good night, all. The zoo is closed.
Good night. Oh.
And now I wake up my mouse and I click this button and it takes a couple